Hello and welcome to our very last episode of our first season here at Fiskaspjall. I'm your host Alessandra and we are back for part 2 with Skúli Skúlason. If you missed the first part, go back and listen to Skúli talk about his path to biology and how fish research has developed in Iceland. In the second part, we get into what Skúli has been working on in more recent years, with a special focus on Icelandic biodiversity and how policymakers are actually taking notes from scientists. So get cozy and remember, at the very end, there is a juicy fish fact waiting for you. Everywhere we go, there is something to see. So dive into the blue to discover the world of fish. Fiskaspjall, where we talk about all things fishy. I also know you're very passionate about advocating for biodiversity and to look more, maybe less about the species and more about the individual variations within species. Did that get born out of your work as well?
Yes, I would say that. And also because of good collaboration internationally in particular. And in fact, that aspect of the research that we continued after I came to Hólar after 1990 was started immediately to consider this. Because Iceland, of course, is a very peculiar place, like islands tend to be. And, we have few species. We have like only 5 freshwater fish species. Norway or Sweden, we would have like 50. 180 in Canada. It's a totally different situation. But the habitats here, because of volcanism and this sort of glacial, terrestrial dynamics, really offer great habitats and resources for fish in the environment. They caused this very rapid evolution of within species diversity. So we were already realizing that this form of diversity had great ecological significance. Because if you look at a lake like Þingvallavatn, where you have these 4 morphs, one is feeding on stickleback, 2 of them differing greatly in size are feeding on benthic invertebrates mostly. Then we have the 4th one which is eating plankton out in the open water. They are kind of important leading figures in the ecosystem, just like they were species. And then, when you look at literature today, people are realizing that this within species diversity is extremely important for conservation and management programs. But we were associating with already back in like 1992, 1993, 4 with people elsewhere that were not necessarily studying fish, that were of the same opinion. And I have to mention one person that I started working with there that I got to know in Berkeley called Tom Smith. It's a very common name.
So don't Google that one.
No, but he is now actually a very distinguished conservation biology professor in California. And he was studying finches in Africa, actually, and birds in Africa that were showing similar intraspecific within species diversification, you see. And we just got together and when we first met, we talked for 12 hours without having a break. And we wrote review papers together that we kind of developed this concept of resource polymorphism. It sounds a bit bragging when I say it, but I think we actually developed the concept, you see.
Can you maybe elaborate for people who aren't with a biology background? Because I think it can be a bit of a mouthful when this is the first time you hear it, resource polymorphism. Like, what is it?
Yeah, it stems from that, when we were starting working with those different varieties, and remind you that people were looking at this more of a taxonomic problem first, and sometimes they would call them subspecies or even full-scale species. I'm not going to go into that problem, but what maybe got the sort of orientation for answering your questions to say that we realized that this diversity in shape and size and behavior of these different morphs or varieties within species was very closely related to their ecology. In other words, mostly to what they were feeding on and and the habitat they chose to be in. And then you can say that we can take many, many different kinds of fish both freshwater and marine actually now, mostly freshwater, and demonstrate that diversity evolves in relation to what they feed and where they are. And people were often using terms like trophic polymorphism or ecological polymorphism, poly referring to the many morphs, you see. And but Tom and I thought this was not really getting it. So we started using the term resource. And actually when we were just out working one in San Francisco where he worked, and we started saying, okay, let's use resource polymorphism because resource is food and resource is habitat. So I'm deliberately making this a bit personal, you see, to talk about people like that because it is a part of the friendship concept, you see.
Yeah, but also research is a very personal thing because we are, borderline obsessed with a topic for a very long time. As you mentioned, after your PhD, you work years and years on one core topic or question. And to be able to do that, you need to be personally invested. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work. We're not paid well enough to make money the prime motivator. So you really need to be passionate about it. Otherwise, it's not working. How do you think climate change is feeding into the whole biodiversity question, but also specifically in Iceland, how it's affecting fish research?
Well, it is clearly important, and in general, as for example, for islands in particular, where you see warming climates, you immediately start thinking about the possibilities of newcomers, new species, even alien, even invasive species. And we do see it in other groups of organisms. Maybe not so much in the fish world in Iceland yet, but we do see some signs of it, like probably some of the events with pink salmon now, and maybe the flounder also. Is related to changes in climate.
Can you maybe mention what that event is?
Well, the pink salmon, for example, is coming here sort of on its own. But so pink salmon is a Pacific salmon, and it's also called humpback salmon because it has this sort of hump on the back. And a long time ago, in 1950s, 60s, the Russians started to move progeny and from the Pacific side of Russia to the north side, the Arctic side, in the attempt to build up populations of these fish in rivers there. And that made it possible for them to eventually make it into the Atlantic.
So the Russians succeeded in building up the population.
And over the years, there were always these occasional pink salmon coming in, but in last few years, we've seen massive change in this. And this has particularly been researched and studied in Norway and Scotland, and a little bit here. So we're seeing this as an example of, and this is very likely climate driven. But the other aspect of the climate change.
Sorry, just to tap in there, as a completely naive person, why would it be so problematic for this pink salmon now coming to Iceland?
Well, I'm not going to necessarily state that it is problematic, except in the sort of notion that we often have that something which is originally sort of human-led problem is always bad. But we humans have all sorts of influence, and it's not all bad. So the evidence for this species to be highly, let's say, damaging for the ecology of rivers, especially when it comes to maybe competing or predating on other fish, for example. There are all sorts of ecological consequences this can potentially have. But we need more research to really verify to what extent that is a problem. Yeah, let me answer this in a diplomatic way, that way.
Yeah, because we haven't had enough time yet to see any of these effects, really.
Which draws attention to the need to monitor ecosystems and monitor lakes and rivers. And this is being done in Iceland, fortunately.
Yeah, lucky us. There's a long history, so much data.
But what I wanted to say about the climate change and other environmental kind of influence which relate to fish in freshwater, we're mostly talking about freshwater fish, is that there has been a big change in especially distributions and population sizes of Arctic char, which of course the Arctic indicates that it's a cold water adapted species. And we are seeing quite dramatic changes all across Iceland in both sea migrating populations, especially in the north of Iceland, and also in number of lakes. And at the same time, the other salmonid brown trout, which is a little bit more tolerant to hotter water or warmer water, is sort of moving in more. And it's well known that this is also happening in the fish populations in the ocean around Iceland. They're moving around, changing their distributional patterns because of warming climate. And this needs to be researched more, actually. It is like we really don't know exactly what's causing the Arctic char changes. We only have really angling data, to show us this. That's not good enough. We need to do much deeper research on this.
So why do you think there isn't already more research on this? Is it really hard to research it, or is it just such a new problem that nobody has gotten around to it yet?
But I think it's a question that is easy to answer and be offensive, you see, by saying that people are occupied with something else, and not really looking at what is important, you see. And I'm not going to really go on that wagon, but we do have tasks at hand in terms of monitoring. For example, the Institute of Marine and Freshwater Research in Iceland has a freshwater department, and they have their hands full in just doing what they're doing in terms of monitoring and working with all sorts of important questions like issues of aquaculture. And so, of course, in perfect world, I would have liked to see them maybe take the lead on this. But then it comes to the universities also. There we are more kind of working with individual interests. People have academic freedom on what they want to study. But if you take a global view of how maybe science should be conducted in a community, then perhaps we should be having a little bit clearer policy on this, maybe, or strategy. And the government, for example, is now developing a biodiversity strategy where there is an opportunity to include plans of this kind. So sometimes there needs to be a comprehensive decision to move into certain new areas, and this is one of them, in my opinion.
Yes, and at this point, I just want to also mention Biodiversity, who is a collaborator of us and does sponsor us in some capacity, which we are eternally grateful for. Biodiversity is an Icelandic collaboration focused on researching, protecting, and strengthening awareness on the country's biodiversity. It brings scientists, educators, and policymakers together to better understand Iceland's nature and support informed decisions about its conservation. Check out their website biodice.is, where you can also sign up to become part of the network. How has that experience been to start Biodice? It's still a very new organization. How is it going? How do you feel about it?
I mean, I have to be very positive here. It's been an absolutely incredible experience to be involved in this, and we've actually been talking about this, me and my sort of closest colleagues, because I should emphasize that my position now, since 2019, has been 50% financed by the Museum of Natural History here in Reykjavik, and so I'm kind of and they pay half of my salaries basically, and for these 6 years now, and they have been sort of the background institution for Biodice and for me being able to focus so much on biodiversity research, biodiversity policy, and biodiversity education. You see, that's maybe what I would like to mention also, because these are the 3 pillars of Biodice. But I also emphasize that this is a network of institutes, individuals, and societies. So we are really trying to build coherent network of people working together and expertise being shared. And we were talking about it, as I said earlier, that just now, like there was a big conference on environment in Iceland, hosted by the government just last week here in Iceland. And for somebody like me, or people involved in biodiversity, closely involved, we were listening. We were looking at what even the minister was saying. And we could recognize some sentences from our materials, our presentations, our many events that we've had. So by bringing it out there, doing your best to tell the truth, say things in the way people understand them, will influence. And we now, for example, see biodiversity being a part of, to make a long story short, just take one example, we see it in the curriculum of elementary and high schools now, biodiversity. It wasn't there. And this came out after we had a meeting with governmental people in ministries about biodiversity about 1.5 years ago. And the guy from the education ministry, he picked this up. Just as an example. So it just shows that moving on in a honest and kind of directional way with promoting something which is very important, like biodiversity conservation on Earth today, is worth doing. And it really makes a change. Doesn't necessarily transform society like the United Nations would like to see today, but it's definitely a contribution towards that.
How does that make you feel to see your hard labor coming around, I think in political sense, quite quickly to get a result after putting in so much effort?
But it's extremely rewarding. I mean, I have to say that, if you look at somebody's happiness, what makes you happy? And this makes me happy. You see, this is the satisfaction. This is the value I see in my life. And I should mention here also, just to become even more personal, but I happen to have a wife which is of the same mindset and is working with education. And that has, I have to say, been extremely supportive and motivating to have my personal life also so much directly related to nature.
Yeah. It's one thing that becomes apparent throughout these interviews is that a supportive partner really goes a long way, and it makes our life and our work even possible at some times, because many people have mentioned spouses moving with them. And so I think it's for me really heartwarming to hear that so many researchers have supportive partners, because I think our lifestyle doesn't necessarily always isn't necessarily conducive to relationships, because we are so obsessive and move around so much mentally, but also physically. So what do you think is one of the biggest challenges nowadays for researchers, or fish researchers specifically in Iceland?
Well, that's something that we all need to think about. I mean, and I think that what we have to be to take this maybe more from a negative side of point of view, or the problematic side of things, is that we would have liked to see more students go into those programs here in undergraduate programs in Iceland, you see. I'm talking now about the Icelandic community, which of course is becoming very international, but we need more biologists to come through that system. And so I think to really summarize it and try to make a simple answer, it is we need more human resources. And of course, you can always talk about the need for more funding, and that which is clearly an issue. One of the things we expect maybe to come out of this new policy of biodiversity, which the government is now finalizing, is that we might be foreseeing an opportunity to make a comprehensive research program to really get a good view of Icelandic biodiversity. But at this time, for aquatic things, fish, and also for terrestrial organisms and marine organisms, the knowledge is very fragmented. It makes it very, very difficult to make proper conservation and management sort of proposals, even though we do succeed in many of the things we do. So I think that sort of is a summary of maybe my feeling for the situation here now.
You mentioned the requirement for more actual physical people in the field, especially young people. How do you feel about that the majority of the biology students are women and that men are becoming increasingly lower in percentage? And especially fascinating given that, a couple of decades ago was the complete opposite.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that switch, and where do we lose all the young men?
Yeah, and I think this was sort of the other side of what I would have liked to say about your first question, about the problems. This is a societal issue, you see. The problem, of course, trickles down, with this sort of type of society we live in, which is so focused on also social media and all this technology and all these self-focused views. I know this is very prejudiced when I say this, but males, to get to that part of your question, are clearly more susceptible to this and become more sort of hooked on things like computer games and, like teenagers and children, you see. And we need to work our way out of this, So I think that, and at the same time, we still see inequality, you see, because even though females are so common now and becoming such a large part of the education society, we need more females in some leading, especially in the industries, in the factories and companies. Of course, we have almost solely female rectors of universities in Iceland now, so it's just an important sign. But it's difficult to answer your question. Question like this in a comprehensive way. So these were just maybe some thoughts.
Oh, I'm perfectly aware of how impossible these questions are, but I have so much faith in you that I knew I could venture out there. So do you have any advice for young researchers in Iceland, like myself, for example? Like any wise words for us, any encouragement, suggestions, tips? We'll take it.
Yeah, I think that, and it sounds maybe very sort of familiar. I started this interview by explaining how much being sort of getting involved in what I was doing. It's not just that you become involved because you're fanatic or you're some kind of a nerd. It is because being out in nature, being in relationship with your subject in an emotional way and with the people you work with, that's where the joy comes from. So I would say to take a fairly high road in this, to say that this is the type of thing that I recommend people focus on, young people focus on. And they care, they pay attention to their emotions about what they're doing and towards the subject, what they really want, and make an effort to build on that. And of course, it's not always possible. There can be constraints, and one of the problems, of course, today that we need to overcome, and I would say that is not just the individual task of the young researcher, is that I would at least like to see people have opportunities to work more directly in their studies. There are so many people that are having jobs and they're having financial issues, and sometimes it's because they are just wanting to buy something. But in other cases, they just need the money. They just need to survive. So that sort of socio-economic situation was different, you see. We didn't have this so much in my university days. See, we were very focused on the research. So, but I think that this is to be true to what you really feel gives you the kick, but also appreciate and look out for the coincidences and opportunities. So when you say that, I started doing this research when I was a young man because I was, so interested in this fish, it was maybe also because it was maybe slightly coincidence that I met somebody that influenced me. And it got me kind of moving into something else.
So finding that fine line between being flexible but also stubborn enough to follow your passion.
Yeah, I think it is follow your passion, but be realistic about it. And given those difficult times that we live in, I mean, I call it difficult times that we live in. This is very consumerism sort of, I would say rather sort of typical market capitalistic society is a challenge. It's a huge challenge because it drives you too much away from these values that we're now talking about. So, and here we maybe say that artists, for example, they are maybe it's good to look at them and think of the way they work, and for example in nature, and start to think of science in a similar way, more than before.
Well, as someone who debated to either become a biologist or a singer, I wholeheartedly will take that advice, very much so. Are you up for like a quick fire round of either or?
Yeah, absolutely.
So either or, freshwater or marine?
Freshwater.
Fieldwork or lab work?
Fieldwork.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Summer or winter?
Summer.
Big international conference or small national conference?
Small national conference.
Like, for example, IceBio, who is coming up, which is coming up soon. So what is your least favorite part about being a scientist?
But let me say that it is when you discover that maybe you spend too much time emphasizing something which then is proven wrong. Not wrong, but I mean, I've changed my course a few times and I've been very fortunate, I think, for me myself, that the decisions I made were good for me. But I think the trap of believing in a theory, I know this is kind of philosophical, but I think one of the problems that comes with this kind of society we live in, it is the Western type science, as opposed, for example, to the traditional ecological thinking societies like in indigenous communities, is that we are trained and we become too much obsessed with abstractions of nature, for example. We get trapped in theories and ideas, and the way philosophy of science is taught is often, unfortunately, driving us in this direction. And that can create far too much naivety and reductionism in the way you try to understand the world. So if you get trapped there, it can be difficult to get out. But the way to get out is to realize that you have to, of course, be focused, because you can never understand nature as a whole. You can never understand an ecosystem as a whole. You have to ask specific questions, and that indicates that you have to work with a fairly well an abstract theory sometimes. But once you've done that and you have discovered something, then open up again, relate it to the bigger context. I think that if you get trapped and you never are able to open up for a bigger context, then I think that's a shame. That leads to anxiety and depression.
Oh boy.
In a scientist.
Yeah. Because scientists are already such nervous creatures sometimes, I think.
I know,
with
I'm
all
being
the
very
pressures.
idealistic.
I know. What is your favorite part about being a scientist?
It's the curiosity part, and the fact that it gives at least me an opportunity to really explore what it is like to be out there in a world that I have only very, very limited way of sensing and understanding. And again, I know I'm being philosophical here, but it's sort of like the unknown is what really drives me there. Yeah.
Is there one thing that you really want people to understand or one misconception that you really would like to clear up? Does anything come to mind?
But I think I'll take a practical example because it relates to what we talked about earlier, and that is to realize the significance of diversity. It is just to realize that without diversity in nature or in culture or human culture, which I said before is the same thing to me, then there can be no relationships. So you need, I think that's a fundamental observation that I make, and of course, so diversity is a reason why we have systems in nature. We have ecosystems, and we have developmental processes in our bodies. For example, is because there is a relationship between the cells and the tissues in your body. That's only possible because of diversity, and also, of course, diversity also is the source of choices. If there is nothing to choose from, if you have there is no way to change. There is no way to respond. And this social science realized this long time ago in terms of understanding the problems of cultures of nations that didn't have opportunities. Called human development. The reasons for human development in healthy societies was opportunities to have something to choose. But nature is the same in evolution and in responses of ecosystems to climate change, for example. So diversity and difference.
Well, I think in such a divisive world that we live in right now, that is the absolute most beautiful message I could imagine. Thank you so much for being here with me today and for indulging all of my questions. And yeah, thank you so much, really. Yeah. It's been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much as well. And an opportunity to like this gives me an opportunity to explore myself as well and share. And of course, I would like to say that the way I approached this discussion for my part was also reflecting where I am today. If you see what I mean. So we're in the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for listening today. Big shout out to my colleagues at Icefish Research, Like, Teresa, Michelle, and Guðbjörg. Thanks to ASIP for handling all the paperwork, and thanks to Háskóli Íslands for awarding us their science outreach grant that makes this podcast possible. Thanks to Sandra Rybicki for designing our beautiful logo, and special thanks to Kaure for trusting me with his incredibly cool recording equipment that allows me to go and record people everywhere. And our title song was written and recorded by me, your host, Alessandra. If you also want to support us, you can subscribe to our podcast on Patreon. There you also get to submit questions and suggestions for future episodes, because yes, there will be a second season. You can also leave us a review, and please tell all of your friends and family about this podcast. It really helps us grow. Follow us at Icefish Research on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, and visit our website at icefishresearch.com. Today's juicy fish fact is about the parrotfish, which spins a full-body mucus cocoon before it goes to sleep. So let's get into a parrotfish's nighttime routine. About an hour before resting, special glands near the gills pump out the gooey mucus that the fish swishes around itself like a transparent little sleeping bag. This cocoon can take 20 to 60 minutes to finish and maybe almost as long as the fish itself. Why do they do it? The mucus acts like a chemical invisibility cloak, masking the fish's smell so nighttime predators, especially sharp-sniffing moray eels, have a harder time detecting them. It also works as a physical shield that keeps tiny skin-nibbling parasites away while the fish sleeps. Imagine like a little mosquito net. Some studies even suggest that the cocoon tears easily if disrupted, which might give the parrotfish a quick warning if something bites or brushes against it. And yes, they do this every night, spinning up fresh mucus like a good little camper. And with that, I want to thank you all for listening to the first season of Fiskaspjall. If you have ideas or suggestions for season 2, feel free to leave a comment or slide into our DMs at Icefish Research on your preferred social media platform. We're all super excited to see you back for season 2. Meanwhile, keep an eye out for some extra bonus episodes that we will be dropping next year. Bye!